Margaret was 62 years old when she arrived at her son's house with a small suitcase in her hand and a hopeful smile on her face. Her health had been getting weaker in recent months, and she thought it was finally time to live close to family. She had dreamed of this moment, sharing meals with her son, hearing the laughter of her grandchild, and feeling safe in a warm home filled with love. Daniel, her only child, opened the door. His smile was polite but distant. He gave her a quick hug and stepped aside to let her in. Margaret tried to hide the ache in her chest. She wanted him to hold her longer, to welcome her like a son should. Still, she told herself not to complain. He had a lot on his mind. Then Vanessa appeared. Tall, stylish, and sharp-eyed. Daniel's wife looked at Margaret as if she were an uninvited guest. She didn't hug her or even offer a warm greeting. "Come in," she said flatly, her voice cold. Margaret forced another smile, hoping things would soften later. That evening, Margaret sat quietly at the dinner table, watching Daniel and Vanessa talk about their busy day. She tried to join the conversation, but Vanessa's answers were short and dismissive. After the meal, Daniel excused himself to take a work call, leaving the two women alone. Margaret felt the silence stretch like a wall between them. She told herself again to be patient. This was family. Things would get better. Later that night, Margaret lay in the small guest room near the baby's nursery. She felt grateful just to be under the same roof with her son and his little family. She closed her eyes and drifted to sleep, breathing softly. Her body, worn with age, let out a faint snore now and then. Vanessa's eyes snapped open in the next room. She sat up, annoyed by the sound. To her, it was unbearable. She stormed into the hallway, muttering under her breath, and woke Daniel with her complaints. "Your mother is disturbing the baby's sleep," she hissed. "We can't live like this." Daniel, half asleep, mumbled something about asking Margaret to adjust. But Vanessa was not satisfied. Her patience snapped. The next morning, she confronted Margaret with sharp words. "You're making it hard for us. If you can't control your snoring, then you'll have to sleep somewhere else. The baby needs peace." Margaret froze, her heart sinking. She tried to explain, her voice trembling, but Vanessa's glare left no room for protest. Humiliated, she obeyed. That night, Vanessa handed her a blanket and pointed to the back porch. And so Margaret sat outside in the cold night air, her thin shoulders wrapped in a blanket, her body shivering. She held back tears, staring at the stars above. She asked herself silently, how did my life come to this? Once she had given everything for her son. She had pictured her old age filled with love and care. But now, on her very first night in his home, she was sitting outside like an unwanted burden. A deep sadness filled her chest, and for the first time, she began to wonder if she truly belonged there at all. Margaret's life had not been easy. She became a widow at a young age, after her husband died suddenly, and left her alone with their only child, Daniel. At first, she thought the pain would break her completely. But each time she looked at Daniel's small face, she knew she had to keep going. He became her reason to live. She worked long hours at a local store, sometimes taking extra cleaning jobs in the evenings just to pay the bills. There were nights when she returned home so tired that her legs could hardly carry her. But still she would sit down and help Daniel with his schoolwork. She sold her gold bangles, the necklace her husband once gave her, even her wedding ring. Anything to make sure Daniel had money for books, school fees, and food. Sometimes, there wasn't enough food for both of them. On those nights, she would quietly drink water and tell Daniel she wasn't hungry, while she watched him eat the last portion. Her heart ached, but her love for him made the sacrifice worth it. Years passed, and Daniel grew into a bright young man. Margaret's heart swelled with pride every time she saw him bring home good grades. She dreamed of the future, how he would become successful, marry a kind wife, and give her the family she always longed for. She imagined herself rocking grandchildren to sleep, teaching them songs, and finally enjoying the warmth of family in her old age. For Margaret, Daniel was not just a son. He was her pride, her joy, her life's purpose. She had given up everything for him, certain that one day he would return her sacrifices with love and care. Now, many years later, Daniel was indeed successful. He had a good job, a big house, and a family of his own. But the closeness Margaret had once dreamed of was not there. Daniel had changed. He was polite to her, but he was distant. He avoided serious conversations, always claiming he was too busy with work. He never raised his voice, but he also never defended her when she needed him most. And then there was Vanessa, his wife. From the beginning, Margaret had hoped for a warm daughter-in-law, someone who would treat her like a second mother. Instead, she found herself facing a woman who was the complete opposite. Vanessa cared deeply about appearances and status. She wanted everything in her life to look perfect to the outside world. And in her eyes, Margaret did not fit into that perfect picture. To Vanessa, Margaret was not family to be loved. She was a burden. An old woman with weak knees and occasional coughing fits. Vanessa complained that Margaret's presence disturbed the peace of the home, especially with the baby now in the house. She often treated Margaret like an outsider, giving her sharp looks and curt replies. Daniel, caught between his wife and his mother, chose silence. He avoided conflict by saying nothing. And each time he said nothing, Margaret felt her heart sink deeper. Her son, the boy she had raised with blood and sweat, the boy for whom she had starved and struggled, would not even speak up for her. Margaret's health was not the best. She had arthritis that made her joints ache, and sometimes she grew weak and dizzy. This was why she had come to Daniel's house in the first place. She had thought, now is the time when family will take care of me, the way I once took care of them. But the reality was far different from her dream. Instead of warmth, she felt coldness. Instead of welcome, she felt rejection. She moved quietly around the house, almost invisible, afraid to anger Vanessa or add to her complaints. What hurt her the most was the house itself. Years ago, when Daniel was struggling to buy it, Margaret had sold her own small home to help him. Every brick of this house had a piece of her sacrifice in it. She had told herself it didn't matter, that her son's happiness was her happiness. But now, as she walked its polished floors, she felt like a stranger in a place she had once dreamed of calling home. Margaret often sat alone in the evenings, listening to the sounds of her grandchild crying in the nursery and Vanessa's firm voice calming the baby. She longed to hold her grandchild, to sing the soft lullabies her mother once sang to her. But Vanessa had made it clear, don't carry her too much. You'll spoil her with your old ways. So Margaret kept her distance, her hands itching to cradle the little one, her heart breaking in silence. She smiled when Daniel glanced her way, but inside she felt smaller and smaller, almost invisible. She had once given her whole life to build Daniel's future. But now, sitting quietly in the corner of his grand home, she wondered if he even remembered. Vanessa's voice rang sharp in the living room one afternoon. She stood with her arms crossed, her face hard. Your mother is too much trouble, she said loudly. Every day it's something new. She makes noise, she moves too slowly, she takes up space. And now the baby can't even rest properly with her around. This can't continue. Margaret sat quietly in the kitchen nearby, folding a small towel. Her hands trembled as she listened. She tried to keep her breathing steady, telling herself that Vanessa was only stressed because of the new baby. But the words cut deep. Too much trouble? After everything she had done, that was how she was seen. Later that night, after Margaret had gone to bed, Vanessa cornered Daniel in their bedroom. Her voice was low but full of anger. It's either your mother or me, she said. I can't raise a baby in this house with her here. She stresses me. She stresses the baby. I won't live like this. Daniel rubbed his forehead, tired from work, from arguments, from life. Vanessa, please, he whispered. Don't talk like that. She's my mother. But Vanessa was firm. And I'm your wife. Your first responsibility is to me and this child. If you can't make a choice, then I will. But she cannot stay here. Daniel sat in silence, his heart pulled in two directions. He thought of his mother, how she had raised him alone, how she had sacrificed for his future. He also thought of his wife, the mother of his child, threatening to walk away. He was afraid of losing his family, afraid of arguments that might destroy his marriage. And so, instead of standing strong, he gave a weak answer. Maybe it would be better if she went back to her own place, he said quietly. She'll be more comfortable there. Vanessa let out a sharp laugh. Exactly. That's the right decision. She doesn't belong here. But Daniel knew the truth. Margaret didn't have her own place anymore. Years ago, she had sold her house to help him buy this very home. She had given him her savings, her security, everything she owned, so that he could live in comfort. And now he was suggesting she go back to a house that no longer existed. What Daniel didn't know was that Margaret had heard part of the conversation. She had gone to the hallway to get a glass of water when she caught his words drifting through the door. Maybe it would be better if she went back to her own place. Her whole body froze. She stood in the dark, clutching the wall for support. For a moment she thought she had misheard. But then Vanessa's laugh confirmed it. They didn't want her there. Her son, her pride, her reason for living, was ready to send her away. Margaret's heart broke quietly in that hallway. Memories rushed back. Nights when she went hungry so Daniel could eat. Mornings when she worked 2 jobs just to pay his fees. The day she sold her wedding ring to buy his school uniform. She had carried him through life with nothing but love and sacrifice. And now he wanted her gone. She walked slowly back to her room, each step heavier than the last. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They were old and wrinkled now, but once they had been strong enough to hold him through every storm. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not cry out. Instead, she pressed her hand to her chest and whispered to herself, "So this is what I have become, unwanted in the very house I helped build." That night, Margaret could not sleep. She turned over again and again, her body aching with more than arthritis. Her heart carried a weight she had never felt before. For the first time in her life, she realized something painful but true. She was no longer wanted. This thought, sharper than any illness, became the spark that would change everything. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret's life inside her son's house became a quiet kind of suffering. Each morning, she woke up early and tried to make herself useful. She would sweep the living room, fold small clothes, or prepare tea. But nothing she did ever seemed good enough for Vanessa. "You don't fold the clothes properly," Vanessa snapped one morning. "And don't touch the baby's things. You'll just mix them up." At meals, Margaret often sat quietly at the edge of the table. Vanessa controlled everything that was cooked and how it was served. If Margaret offered to help, Vanessa would frown. "No, you'll take too long. I don't want the kitchen in a mess." When food was finally served, Margaret sometimes got the smallest portion. She never complained. She lowered her eyes and ate slowly, telling herself she was thankful just to sit at the table with family. But inside she felt invisible, like a guest no one wanted. Her biggest pain came with the baby. Margaret longed to hold her granddaughter. She wanted to sing soft lullabies and kiss her tiny cheeks, just as she had once done for Daniel. But Vanessa quickly stopped her. "Don't carry her too much," she said sharply. "You'll spoil her with your old ways. Babies today need structure, not silly songs." Margaret's arms ached to hold the child, but she obeyed. She sat quietly and watched from across the room as Vanessa rocked the baby. Sometimes the baby reached her small hands toward Margaret, but Vanessa turned away, as if to block the connection. The days grew heavier. Margaret's arthritis made her joints stiff, and the stress in the house made her weaker. She coughed more often now, and at night she lay awake, feeling pain not just in her body but in her heart. Daniel noticed little. When Margaret tried to talk to him, he brushed her off gently. "Mother, I'm busy. Work is stressful right now. We'll talk later." But later never came. He avoided deep conversations, as if afraid to face the truth. His silence felt louder than Vanessa's sharp words. Each time he chose not to defend her, Margaret felt another piece of her heart crack. Sometimes, neighbors noticed her outside late at night. Margaret would sit quietly on the back porch with a blanket, staring at the stars, her thin body shivering in the cool air. She looked like a shadow of herself, a lonely figure in the dark. People whispered among themselves, "Why is she always outside? Is everything all right in that house?" But no one dared to ask directly. Vanessa, on the other hand, kept up a perfect image in public. She smiled at neighbors, dressed well, and showed off her baby proudly. To everyone else, she looked like a devoted wife and mother. No one would have guessed the coldness she showed Margaret behind closed doors. The breaking point came one stormy night. Rain beat against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the sky. Margaret lay in bed, her breathing heavy. She drifted into sleep, and without realizing it, her soft snoring began. Vanessa's patience snapped once again. She stormed into Daniel's room. "I can't stand this anymore. Even the rain is quieter than your mother. She's disturbing the baby again. She has to sleep outside." Daniel sighed, tired from the endless fights. "Vanessa, it's raining. She can't go outside. But Vanessa's eyes blazed. Then you choose, Daniel. Either the baby sleeps or your mother sleeps. I won't let this continue. Daniel rubbed his face, torn and weak. In the end, he said nothing. And his silence was permission enough for Vanessa. Moments later, Margaret found herself standing on the back porch once again. Rain spraying against her blanket. The cold air bit into her skin. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her body trembling. She sat on a wooden chair, listening to the storm, her heart heavier than the clouds above. Hours passed, the blanket grew damp, and the cold sank deep into her bones. She coughed hard, her chest tightening. By morning, her head burned with fever, and her body ached all over. Still, she said nothing. She did not want to cause more trouble. As she sat there shivering in the gray light of dawn, Margaret realized her silence had become her only shield. But even that could not protect her anymore. Her body was breaking under the weight of neglect, and her heart carried a sorrow too heavy for words. In that moment, she wondered if this was how her story would end. Not with love, not with care, but with rain soaking her blanket, fever in her body, and tears she no longer had the strength to cry. Margaret collapsed one chilly morning in the yard. She had gone outside to catch some fresh air, but her weak body finally gave in. Her knees buckled, and she fell onto the damp grass, her breath shallow, her face pale. It was Mrs. Carter, the neighbor, who saw her first. She had come out to water her flowers when her eyes landed on Margaret lying helplessly on the ground. Shock rushed through her. "Oh my God, Margaret," she cried, dropping her watering can and hurrying over. She knelt beside her, touching her forehead. It was burning hot. Margaret's lips trembled, her body shaking with fever. Mrs. Carter's heart broke at the sight. She looked toward the house and shouted, "Daniel! Vanessa! Someone come quickly!" Vanessa appeared at the door, her arms folded, her face showing more irritation than concern. "She's fine," she said flatly. "She just exaggerates. She always makes a scene." "A scene?" Mrs. Carter snapped, furious. "She can barely breathe. Look at her." Vanessa shrugged. "She's old. What do you expect? You don't have to fuss over every little fall. She'll get up when she's ready." But Mrs. Carter was not going to let it pass. She pulled out her phone and dialed the emergency number. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived. Paramedics lifted Margaret gently onto a stretcher. Vanessa rolled her eyes and muttered something about drama, but Mrs. Carter shot her a look that silenced her. At the hospital, doctors examined Margaret quickly. Their faces grew serious. "She has pneumonia," one of them said. "How long has she been sick?" Margaret, too weak to answer, closed her eyes. When Daniel arrived at the hospital after being called, the doctors spoke directly to him. "She's very ill. Pneumonia at her age is dangerous. Why was she not given care sooner? Has she been left outside in the cold?" Daniel froze. He didn't know how to respond. His eyes shifted nervously toward Vanessa, who had joined him at the hospital, pretending to look worried. She never said anything," Daniel muttered weakly. The doctors exchanged doubtful glances. A social worker was soon brought in. She asked firm questions about how Margaret had been living, why she was left in such a condition, and why her health had been ignored. "This looks very close to elder neglect," the social worker said, her tone sharp. "We will need to investigate." Daniel's chest tightened. For the first time, the seriousness of the situation hit him fully. His mother's thin frame lay helpless in the hospital bed, her breathing ragged. And he, her son, had allowed it to come to this. As the investigation began, the truth started to unravel. A hospital administrator mentioned financial documents they had found among Margaret's medical files. Papers showed that years ago, Margaret had sold her own house and transferred most of the money into Daniel's account. That money had been used as part of the down payment for the very house Daniel and Vanessa now lived in. Daniel stared at the papers in disbelief. She sold her house?" he whispered. The administrator nodded. "Yes. It's all here. She gave up everything to help you." Daniel turned to Vanessa, his face pale. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Vanessa's eyes flickered, her lips tightening. She looked away. "Did you hide this from me?" His voice rose, trembling with rage. Vanessa crossed her arms. "I didn't hide anything. I just didn't think it mattered. She wanted to help you. And besides, it wasn't healthy for her to keep controlling your life with guilt money." I told you she was manipulative. Manipulative. Daniel's voice thundered through the hospital hallway. That woman lying in there gave up her home, her savings, everything she had for me. She starved herself so I could eat. She worked until her body broke so I could have a future. And you call that manipulation? His hands shook as he spoke. Vanessa tried to calm him, but Daniel was beyond calming. Years of silence, of looking away, came crashing down on him at once. Guilt rose like a wave, drowning him. He saw clearly now what he had refused to see before. His mother had been treated like a burden, and he had let it happen. He turned to Vanessa, his voice low but full of fury. You poisoned me against her. You made me believe she was too much trouble. And I let you. I let you. Vanessa's face hardened, but she said nothing. Daniel pressed his hands to his head, feeling sick. In that moment, he realized the truth that would haunt him forever. His mother, the woman who had given him everything, lay fighting for her life, while he had stood by in silence. And all because he had chosen to protect his comfort instead of her dignity. Daniel sank into a chair, his head in his hands, his guilt consuming him. Margaret survived after weeks of treatment in the hospital. Her body slowly grew stronger, though it was a long and painful journey. But it was not only her body that changed, her heart did too. Something inside her hardened and healed at the same time. She no longer felt the need to beg for acceptance in a house where she was clearly unwanted. She realized that life had to go on, even if her son did not stand by her. The love she carried for him would always remain, but she could not allow herself to keep suffering in silence. For the first time in her life, she chose herself. With the help of Mrs. Carter, her kind neighbor who had saved her, Margaret found support at a local community center. The people there welcomed her warmly. They helped her apply for affordable housing meant for seniors. Soon, she moved into a modest apartment, small but peaceful, with a little window that let the sun in every morning. It wasn't the grand life she had once dreamed of, but it was hers, and it gave her peace. Mrs. Carter often visited, bringing food and laughter. At the center, Margaret also met others her age who shared their stories of hardship and survival. She discovered she wasn't alone in her struggles. Slowly, she began to rebuild a life that no longer depended on Daniel or Vanessa. Meanwhile, Daniel was drowning in guilt. The weight of what had happened pressed on him day and night. He visited Margaret, bringing flowers, bringing gifts, bringing words of apology. His eyes were full of shame. "Mother, I am so sorry," he whispered again and again. "Please let me make this right." Margaret listened quietly. She looked at her son, the boy she had once carried on her back, the boy she had given everything for. Her voice was calm but firm when she finally spoke. "Daniel, I raised you to be strong. I didn't raise you to be cruel. Yet you let me suffer in silence. You chose silence over love." Her words pierced him deeper than any anger could. Daniel wept, but Margaret did not. She had already made peace with her decision. She would not return to his house. She would not place her life in the hands of people who saw her as a burden. As for Vanessa, the truth spread quickly through the community. Neighbors had already whispered about Margaret sitting outside in the cold. Now, with the hospital and social workers involved, the whispers turned into judgment. People looked at Vanessa differently. The perfect image she had worked so hard to maintain crumbled. She avoided gatherings, her pride broken, but the damage was done. Daniel too faced the consequences. At work and among friends, people questioned him. How could a man who had been given so much by his mother allow her to be treated so poorly? His silence had protected his marriage, but it had destroyed his honor. Margaret, though heartbroken, began to discover a new kind of peace. She spent her evenings knitting, sometimes making small clothes for her granddaughter, though she no longer expected to be asked to visit. She sat by her window with a cup of tea, watching the sun fade and the stars appear. For the first time in years, she felt calm. Her life had been filled with sacrifice, and though her heart still carried scars, she had finally chosen her dignity. She no longer waited for love to be handed to her. She created peace for herself, and in that quiet strength, Margaret found freedom. Margaret, now in her modest apartment, sat by the window with soft evening light falling across her lap. A ball of yarn rested beside her, and in her hands she gently worked the knitting needles. Slowly, stitch by stitch, a small blanket began to take shape. She was making it for her granddaughter, the little one she had longed to hold but was kept away from. Her apartment was simple: one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a chair by the window. But it was quiet, peaceful, and hers. No sharp words, no cold glares. Just silence, broken only by the soft sound of her knitting needles and the steady beat of her heart. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to Daniel. She saw him as the little boy she once carried on her back, the boy she starved for, the boy she gave her life to raise. Her chest ached, but she did not let the tears fall. She whispered softly into the room, words meant only for herself and the memory of her love. "I may not be welcome in your house, but I will always be your mother." The words hung in the air, gentle yet firm, carrying both sorrow and strength. She no longer waited for an invitation, no longer begged for a place in his life. Her love was still there, unshaken, but her dignity was hers to protect. Margaret laid the half-finished blanket across her lap and smiled faintly. She had lost much, but she had gained something precious too: her freedom, her peace, her self-respect. Outside, the evening sky glowed with fading light. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on the yarn, and breathed deeply. Her heart still carried scars, but she had found a quiet strength within herself. Her story, though filled with pain, had not ended in defeat. It had ended in dignity. And that, at last, was enough. Hi friends! Sparkling Heart, thanks so much for staying with me till the end. Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories. See you next time. Waving Hand Sparkles.